Now, it's amazing to me how we're meant to put up with the left bleating on and on and on about discrimination. It's as if they're desperately seeking out the boogeyman of bigotry, and it doesn't matter how trumped up the story has to be, they're determined to find it. I mean, for example, merely expressing that maybe male bathrooms should be for men and female bathrooms should be reserved for women, well, if you say that in the current climate, that itself is going to be a case of bigotry levelled against you. But it's just true. And yet, the left has one group that they're deafeningly quiet about, and that's Christians. You see, Christians seem to be the only outfit, organisation, association where it's open season to discriminate against. Take the example that's just made headlines, although of course you won't hear it or read it in the lefty press, it's only in the mainstream media now, of a Virginia restaurant denying service to a Christian group. Here was the president of the conservative advocacy organisation explaining what happened.
And I think most people assume that food service is something that we can all agree on. And so it is stunning. And it does feel a bit like no Christians can eat here, because if you go right to our website at familyfoundation.org, where the staff member said they Googled us, you'll find that we are a faith-based organization. So it absolutely does feel like there's a religious discrimination happening by this restaurant.
Joining me now to discuss this and a lot more that is going on in America is documentary filmmaker Ami Horowitz. Ami, it's great to have you on the Bolt Report again. Tell me, if this was any other group other than Christians that was refused service in a restaurant, would we ever hear the end of it?
Oh, Cory, man, I love discussing leftist hypocrisy. Thank you for teeing that up for me. And this is a perfect example of how hypocritical the left is on these type of issues, particularly when it comes to civil rights. So, yeah, you have this. Look, at the end of the day, what do religious people want? They don't want to be compelled to go against their beliefs. And then the religious left, they want to compel everybody to go and believe the way they believe. That's essentially how this thing is laid out. And the two examples of the one you mentioned with the Christian organization that wanted to attend a Virginia restaurant and they were canceled because of their beliefs dovetails nicely with what we're seeing right now in the Supreme Court, where they are now looking at a case where a graphic designer was asked to make a website for a gay wedding and they refused, similar to the Master Cake Theater thing we saw a couple years back. And it's a perfect example of this hypocrisy because, of course, the left isn't attacking this Virginia restaurant while they're absolutely attacking this graphic designer. And you have the ACLU, for those who don't know, in Australia, the American Civil Liberties Union, which has gone against civil liberties. Admittedly, they even say it. They need to change the name of that organization. They are actually they've gone against the Master Cake person, and now they're going against the graphic designer. I mean, this is a far cry from the ACLU, who was supporting the Nazis marching in Skokie. And the truth is, though, when you look at the conservative side, there are some people who actually say that, at the end of the day, both should be allowed, and that there's a distinction between state discrimination, which is anti-constitutional, which absolutely should be abolished. Everyone agrees with that, obviously. But then there's also the idea of private association, which is actually in the Constitution. And that strict constructionists, people who are orthodox to the document, the letter of the law of the Constitution, say, wait a second, maybe we need to take a look, though, at private association, and private companies should be able to do what they want. But you can't have it both ways. Now, I happen not to believe that, but certainly there are people who make that argument. And look, this is where we're at. This is the situation that we've seen for a while, where the left, the liberals, who used to purport to be for civil liberties, have come out against civil liberties.
Yeah, I mean, the example you mentioned there reminded me when I was in politics, I commissioned a website organisation, and then they found out about my politics and they said, we'd rather not do your work. I accepted that because I don't want to be associated with someone who doesn't want to be associated with me. But hypocrisy is everywhere in this game. Okay, the midterms were a bit of a mixed bag for the Republican Party, and the Georgia runoff, well, that didn't work out too well for them, with a Democrat now securing a majority there in the Senate. Donald Trump is wearing a bit of opprobrium over this. He's got a bit of egg on his face, apparently. If this was a trial run for 2024, Ami, it shows that Trump hasn't got the same momentum anymore. Do you reckon the Republican establishment are going to use this to justify trying not to give him the nomination?
Yeah, I don't think Trump thinks he has egg in his face. I think Trump thinks he did an excellent job, a wonderful job in the midterms. By the way, one quick comment before we get to Trump is I want to point out that everybody kept again the left. Their mantra is voter suppression. The Republicans are trying to suppress the black vote. That's what they keep trotting out that BS time and time again. And they were pushing this Georgia election. Look, all these laws, the voter ID, you have to show your ID to vote. What happened, of course? There was no voter suppression, and the black vote was massive, up 10% from 4 years ago. So it just blows that entire voter suppression argument out into the ether. When it comes to Trump, yeah, look, I think the Republican mainstream, the ones who are trying to move Trump back to the history of the Republican Party, will use it against him, and they'll have a lot of reason to. If you look across the spectrum of his candidates, they didn't do that well. Now, he did overall. He'll say, look, I was 50%. And that's true. Overall, he was 50%. But if you carve out the seats that were heavily favored toward Republicans, he lost 10 out of his 11 choices for those seats, including every single toss-up. So, no, when it came to competitive races, he did very, very poorly because he was pushing terrible, awful extremist candidates. Mastriani in Pennsylvania was an absolutely awful candidate. Bolden in New Hampshire, and Herschel Walker, of course, in Georgia, despite the fact that, he had a leg up because, he's related to probably half of the Atlanta suburbs, yet he failed to he actually performed more, it was a poorer showing than he did in the runoff. And again, awful candidate, and going against an awful candidate, it was an opportunity here to pick off a terrible senator that people in Georgia, for the most part, didn't care for. But the fact they could not pick a candidate who was worthy enough to beat this guy shows you how poor Trump's ability is to pick candidates.
Yeah, I was particularly disappointed in Walker's performance because his opponent was terrible, but he didn't have enough money either. I mean, I think he was outspent 2-1 in that race. Now, speaking of a brewing competition, it seems our royal family and what has been adopted over there as your royal family, the insufferable Harry and Meghan, they've got this sob tour going out ahead of their Netflix documentary. They've just received a Human Rights Award from the Robert F. Kennedy Rights Foundation. They conveniently forgot that Harry dressed as a Nazi for a party once. What is going on in the US? Why are you embracing them, or are the sensible people over them like we are, and it's just the tabloid press that are pushing them as hard as they can?
Yeah, speak for yourself. I have not embraced them. Oh, I hate those two. And by the way, I did not forget that Harry wore the Nazi costume. Not at all. That's ingrained in my memory, unfortunately. I really have a strong dislike. Yeah, no, maybe hate is not strong. Is not too strong a word for that couple. They are among the most privileged, if not possibly the most privileged couple on planet Earth, yet they walk around claiming we're victims. We are victims of our privilege. And the ingratitude they have, in fact, they embody two of the worst human characteristics. Things that I hate the most are ingratitude and victimhood, and they embody both. But worse, they embody both when they are so privileged. He is a prince and she is a princess, or at least they were. And they are walking away with $100 million Netflix deal so people can listen to their whining. No thank you. Hard pass.
I'm with you there. I'm completely over them. I'll never talk about them on this show again. Ami Horowitz, thanks so much for your time, and all the best for the week ahead.